Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. I'm Jamie here with John. What is happening?
Man, not much. How you doing?
Doing really well. I mean, it's summer, I guess officially. It's summer everywhere. Summer things are happening.
I just got back from summer camp with the youth group at church, and I am officially old and I need a bed for like 4 days.
Yeah, man, it's a lot at your age, Grandpa.
I took a 2-hour nap today. It was glorious.
Those are the best. No, it's things are going well. We got a really good list of cases coming up. We been talking to Mackenzie, our lead researcher, about what's coming up, and yeah, she seemed pretty pumped as well in our last conversation. So can't wait to deliver some of those, and that starts today. But before we get going, I want to read our most recent 5-star review. It comes from Mick Depp, as in Johnny Depp. Not sure if they're related. I gave this podcast 5 stars because I couldn't give it 10. Informative yet entertaining.
I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Mick. That's very kind of you, and we appreciate that.
Guys, if you want your 5-star review read, just leave those over on Apple. I think Spotify has those now, if I'm not mistaken. So anywhere you can leave a review, we will take it.
Absolutely. It's the best way to help the show grow, and we certainly appreciate any and all reviews and comments.
I do want to mention, if you have not already signed up for Patreon, please go do that. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to a bonus episode only available to Patreon members at the beginning of every month, and you get our regular content early and ad-free. So if you binge listen to everything we have and want just a little bit more, we have almost, like you said, almost 9 or 10 years worth of exclusive content over at patreon.com.
Absolutely. And some good stuff over there. And we take recommendations from over there. We got a couple cases coming up that came in over there recently.
Yeah. And I'm not to say that we don't listen to all recommendations, but I feel like Patreon members get those are get bumped to the top. I mean, we appreciate Patreon members a lot. And all right, man. 1991 is where we're going back to.
It was a good year.
It was a good year. I was in first grade and probably not aware of this situation we are going to talk about today. So why don't you get the ball rolling?
Also in first grade for 1992 and 1993. So it was a big decade.
First grade was the best 3 years of my life.
We're going to go to the Big Island on Hawaii in the afternoon of Christmas Eve in 91, and Dana Ireland was riding her bicycle down a small road. She was visiting from Virginia, and that day she was riding 8 miles or so from her family's rental home to a friend's house to invite him to come over for Christmas dinner. She made it to her friend's house, but never made it back home to her parents. At 5 p.m., people were near the entrance of the neighborhood where her parents' rental was, and they saw what looked like an abandoned collision site. There were tire tracks in the dirt, a white tennis shoe, and a mangled bicycle. And then it got more graphic when they found clumps of blonde hair. And of course, Dana was blonde. They looked around and didn't see anybody. Nobody who may have fallen off the bicycle, nobody who may have been involved with, I mean, it was mangled, so they thought a car hit it. No cars nearby. Couldn't find a person, so they called the police.
Around the same time the police were called to the mystery scene, there was a woman who found Dana Ireland laying a few miles away in the bushes just off a fishing trail. She was beat up, but still conscious. She was incoherent, partially clothed, and able to say that she had been sexually assaulted. It took an hour and a half before emergency services arrived and took her to the hospital. Because of the massive loss of blood that she had sustained, Dana Ireland was pronounced dead at 12:07 a.m. on Christmas Day, 1991. She was only 23 years old. There is absolutely never a good time to lose a loved one, especially your own child. But on Christmas Day, a day that had brought joy for the previous 20 something years, will never be the same after that.
No, and you look at the scene, there's this accident or incident, I should say, where the bike gets hit. And if that happens, John, you expect if there is somebody hit by a car on a bike that they're going to be nearby. Maybe they could pedal off or be knocked into the weeds on the side of the road. But 3 miles away obviously raises a lot of eyebrows.
And she had thought that she had been sexually assaulted. So that's, major red flag.
And most of the time in these situations, you don't have somebody coherent enough to say that. So obviously a big piece of information, and the investigators got to work. They had the bike, the hair, the shoe, and they also found a watch. At a nearby fishing trail, authorities found more clothing, including a t-shirt that was soaked in blood. They also collected the sheet from the ambulance ride and Dana's remaining clothes. For the first few days of the investigation, authorities searched for 2 types of vehicles they thought might have been involved: a dark-colored 1970s model pickup truck or a light-colored van. Obviously, those look distinctly different. But even in the early 90s, those late 70s trucks weren't necessarily around in bulk, I would say. I wasn't in Hawaii, at least they weren't in Kentucky. Nobody was arrested for the crimes against Dana, but for years her family were very public in their activism, trying to put pressure on authorities to solve this case and to bring their daughter's killer to justice. There wouldn't be any leads to follow for another 3 years.
On May 23rd, 1994, John Gonzalez told authorities that he had information about the case. At the time, John was facing a very long prison sentence for selling cocaine. He told investigators that his half-brother Frank Pauline was present at the time that Dana was attacked and knew about her death. Frank was also in trouble with the law. He was facing a 10-year prison sentence for sexual assault and theft. Authorities interviewed him in June of 1994. Frank Pauline says that he was there when 20-year-old Albert Ian Schweitzer, who goes by Ian, and his 16-year-old brother Sean Schweitzer attacked Dana Ireland. Frank said that he did not take part in the rape, but he did hit Dana in the head with a tire iron. During this interview, Frank could not recall what Dana looked like or whether or not she had been riding a bike.
I feel like the last few months we've been especially hard on prison snitches, on witnesses that claim to have heard confessions in prison. That's not necessarily what's happening here, but we do get the idea that John Gonzalez has some incentive to come up with information here. And he provides the information of Frank, who, again, was also in trouble. And it didn't take long for Frank to start confessing. So obviously, you and I, not big prison snitch guys, not huge fans of what they bring to the table. But with Frank confessing so quickly of being there and being a part of it, it certainly gives a little more meat to it. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a time and a place for it, but I think you gotta take what you're told, and then you have to also verify those facts. I don't think you just take the word blindly.
Yeah, him not knowing what Dana looked like or whether or not she had been on a bike is not a great start. But let's hear a little bit more about these guys in prison. Frank Pauline and his family lived across the street from the Schweitzer family, and there had been a long feud between these two families. Pauline said that he was never friends with the Schweitzer brothers, but he said they picked him on Christmas Eve in 1991 in their Volkswagen Bug so they could all go out and do drugs. Now, this is a small family feud. We're not talking Hatfields and McCoys here, but do you ever remember picking up somebody you didn't like in high school to go do something illegal? Wait, that's incriminating. Do you remember picking up somebody you didn't like to go do anything in high school?
No, man. I mean, if we didn't like each other and we were not friends, why would we hang out together? So no, I can think of 0 times where I would pick up somebody that I did not like.
The police didn't believe Frank at first because his story was so inconsistent and didn't make a lot of sense. But when he started giving this information, he started getting some special treatment. He was allowed more phone calls to his girlfriend. He got extra visits and preferred prison housing. Additionally, Gonzalez and other members of this family received deals in their pending narcotics cases. And this is all coinciding with Frank's cooperation in the investigation to Dana Ireland. Over the next 2 years, authorities continued to interview Frank Pauline about this case. They interviewed him at least 7 times. None of the interviews were recorded, and his answers were frequently inconsistent. So the fact that they're even doing this over 2 years without any arrests makes me think that there's not a lot to it. And when you look back and see that what they did document doesn't add up to a lot, it's certainly not, I think, a strong lead for them to focus too much on, but they dragged it out over years, and it was really all they had.
And there was technology available to record interviews in the early 90s. It's certainly not what it is today, but it did exist. And, not recording those and storing those for later seems a little odd to me. The police didn't find any evidence connecting the Schweitzer brothers to the attack on Dana. When they were questioned, they denied any involvement, and they pointed out that the families, their family and Frank and his brother, had been feuding for years. The police did confiscate the Volkswagen Bug that had been painted yellow, but it was purple at the time of the attack. They compared paint scrapings from the car with paint found on the bicycle. They also examined hairs found in the car, and none of it connected. Then investigators collected dental impressions from the brothers because during the sexual assault, Dana had a bite mark on her breast. A forensic dental examiner initially excluded Ian from being the person who made the bite mark, but then later testified that his teeth were consistent with the bite mark. So you have this expert who is saying, no, this cannot be Ian, but then later said, yes, they were consistent with the mark. So, there's no other physical evidence that they collected from the brothers that connect in any way. And now you have this bite mark that initially excluded him, but now they're saying, yeah, they are consistent.
I realize that I'm cynical at this point. I know you and I disagree on polygraphs. I don't love certain ballistic tests. Bite marks, I think, are also really, really tricky. I'm not a dental specialist, but I imagine there are a lot of different angles and other factors that can change the way a dental impression looks.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, like I've been trained in forensic child abuse, so I can look at, a mark that potentially was left on a child when they were hit, and I can tell you, was that a handprint? Was that a belt print? That kind of stuff is easy. But a bite mark, it's very possible, but it's not 100%. If there had been some kind of, anomaly, like if there was a tooth that was super crooked in some unique way, then that of course helps. But if, nowadays where everybody's had braces, it's probably a little bit more challenging.
Right. Yeah. I can say, yes, that's a bite print.
Yeah.
That's a bite mark. That's about as far as I feel comfortable. So,
but dentists can do the, impressions and bite tests and get, I think that's possible, but you also have to think, was her body degraded in some way? Was there scratch marks that would, be on the same area that would make it harder to identify? Those are questions we don't have answers to. It's possible. I don't understand the back and forth.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agree. On July 30th of 1997, Frank Pauline was indicted for Dana Ireland's murder, rape, and kidnapping. On October 9th, 1997, both Ian and Sean were indicted on the same charges. 1 year later, on October 20th, 1998, DNA testing definitively excluded Ian, Sean, and Frank as contributors of the semen left on Dana's body. Now, this is a huge piece of evidence. This is as soon as DNA is getting ramped up. So For them to be able to say somebody raped her and this semen came from none of these guys is huge evidence. So to say that if they were the three people there and none of them raped her, then something's off about this story.
And Frank is the only one, and tell me if I'm wrong, but he's the only one saying that he was there.
Absolutely.
And contributed. Yeah. But he said that he denied, being the one who raped her, but he put himself there. Ian and Sean, there's nothing saying that they were there except for Frank.
Right. Unless the questionable bite mark, but it's very questionable. So this test included the rape kit, the sheet from the ambulance, men's underwear that were found at the scene, and a Jimmy Z t-shirt. All of the male DNA was from an unknown contributor. At this time, the charges were dismissed without prejudice. So to be clear, when a criminal case or a lawsuit is dismissed without prejudice, it means the charges are dropped, but the prosecutor or plaintiff retains the legal right to refile the same charges at a later date. A few years ago, we saw Alec Baldwin's case dropped with prejudice. They can never charge him for that again. That was due to misconduct of the prosecution and the law enforcement and that kind of thing. But here they retain the right to engage in these charges and to come back with them. And as you may suspect, since we're only about 16 minutes in here, this is not the end of this story, and they retain the right to charge him again.
Investigators ran the unknown DNA through CODIS, and there were no matches at the time. They continued, though, to search for evidence that would link the Schweitzer brothers to the crime. However, both of these men had alibis at the time, and we mentioned the paint job on the VW Bug, but it was searched, but it was not even owned by Ian when Dana was attacked. So he bought this 2 months after her death. But on May 5th, 1999, a man named Michael Ortiz told prosecutors that Ian confessed to being involved in Dana Ireland's death. He said they were both in the Hawaii Community Correctional Facility when Ian confessed.
I feel like we need a button to hit when there's a prison snitch, like prison snitch alert button, because that's what we see again here.
Yeah, that is definitely a common theme for sure. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the Schweitzer brothers and Frank Pauline were re-indicted on May 20th, 1999. Frank went to trial in August of 1999. Witnesses said that he often wore a Jimmy Z t-shirt like the one that was found at the crime scene. In his defense, Frank testified that he made up the whole story because his brother, John, pressured him into telling the police so that the whole family could get lesser sentences for, I guess, their other crimes that they were being prosecuted for.
Yeah, a lot of cocaine happening.
On October 14th, 1999, the jury convicted Pauline of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
Almost all of this is based on his confession. We've covered false confessions before. They're a very real thing, and they happen for a variety of reasons. We rarely see somebody go to prison for murder based on confessing to get somebody lesser time for a lesser charge.
I mean, he said that he hit Pauline with a tire iron. So yes. I could understand that you could potentially try him for second-degree murder and for potential kidnapping, but to put the sexual assault on him, I don't know if if the law includes those who may assist with another individual who is perpetrating sexual assault to be tried in the same way. Though that's a question I don't have the answer to right now, but there's not a lot of physical evidence. Actually, sorry, there's no physical evidence putting him there, but he did say that he hit her with a tire iron.
Yeah, I think, I guess I just assumed that the rape charge was, if these three guys did this crime together, even if they all didn't do everything, we're going to charge all three of them for it.
And even if they were all three there, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was the semen, at least, that was there was not belonging to one of these three men. So
Right.
if these three men were in fact there, there's a fourth person potentially who has to be brought in before justice is served.
On January 24th of 2000, Ian Schweitzer went to trial in Hawaii County Circuit Court, and the prosecution used the same arguments that they had used to convict Frank. They had no eyewitnesses, they had no biological evidence, and no connection back to Ian outside of Frank's confession. Witnesses testified that Ian owned the purple Volkswagen Bug and that he was seen with Frank that day. They also testified that the Volkswagen was seen damaged in the hours after the attack, and they alleged that Dana's injuries were caused when Ian ran over her while she was on the bicycle. Alex Franchi testified that he was drinking with Ian, Sean, and Frank when Dana rode by on her bike, and that later Ian drove off in that same direction that she was going, placing him near the scene of the crime. And then John Gonzalez testified that Frank got in a fight with his girlfriend that night and ended up leaving. And when he came back hours later, Gonzalez said that Frank was with the Schweitzer brothers with the Volkswagen Beetle, which was damaged. When it came to the car, the title wasn't transferred until 2 months later, like we talked about, the end of January of 92, but it was argued whether or not they actually had possession of the car, John. I know that in our lives, we've both purchased used vehicles. I know you are very clear up front of we're switching this title over as soon as the money exchange. That's not the case everywhere. Like some people are a little more loose with it. So is this possible? Yes. Is it provable? No.
Yeah. I mean, where did he get the car from? Did he buy it from a family member so that he was potentially driving it well before it was ever transferred? You know, I think it is plausible that he could have owned the car at the time. Was it a purple Volkswagen that was seen that had hit the bike and Pauline?
It didn't match. The paint didn't match.
So even, you know, even it was painted yellow as a part to cover it up, but it was originally purple, and that didn't even match, right?
Yeah, they were looking for a maroon truck or a tan van.
And that does not look like either of those things.
Not even close.
This was a road that was primarily used by larger vans or pickup trucks because this was a back road. This was for people who were going fishing. Like, I don't know, I imagine in Kentucky there are, you know, there's the main roads, there's small 2-lane roads, but this sounds like this is like a back road that not a lot of people use and would be hard for a car, let alone a Volkswagen Beetle, to get down. Yeah,
definitely not an off-road vehicle. Definitely not a lot of room underneath it. You're going to drag on a lot of stuff and probably be a lot more evidence of it. But I digress.
Yeah, I'm kind of bewildered here because we're making this argument about who owned the car, when they owned the car. The color of the car was painted from purple to yellow. Yet, even with all of those facts, that does not match the car that was seen or that we believe hit the bicycle. So why does all of that even matter?
Just because Frank said they were in the Volkswagen is the only thing I can come up with. Is if he was right that they were in the Volkswagen, then that gives a little more credence to his story.
And I mean, you know, in 1991, I'm sure paint analysis was not what it is today, but also if there's a paint transfer that's from a maroon vehicle, yellow and purple are different than maroon. So
they are indeed.
So you don't have to be a rocket surgeon to know the difference in your colors.
I guess maroon could be close, could be, but not necessarily. So I don't know. I don't see any evidence besides the testimony of Frank that they would even be after this Beetle.
All right, let's keep on going because maybe some of my questions will get answered. Jeffrey Wheeler was a biomechanics consultant who testified that based on Dana's bike, a vehicle struck her from behind, pushing the bicycle forward, causing Dana to fall back against the vehicle. Then the director of the Accident Investigation Division at Northwestern University's Traffic Institute, Kenneth Baker, testified the damage to the bicycle was consistent with being hit with a Volkswagen Bug. Prosecution also called in Ortiz to testify that Ian said he simply meant to scare Dana but the Volkswagen slid in the gravel and hit the back of her tire, and she flew off the bike. And he said that he got scared, stopped, and Frank Pauline got out, and Frank grabbed her and started dragging her to the car by her hair.
And there were clumps of her hair found at the scene, so there's that.
Ortiz also said that Frank Pauline was the one who had bit Dana on the breast. Under cross-examination, Ortiz testified that he didn't tell police about this confession for a year, and not until he was in prison in Minnesota. Because of this, he testified his prison term was reduced. So he did get a deal for testifying to the police.
We also don't have any evidence from a dental professional that Frank's dental records matched up with the bite mark. So again, we've got all this testimony that it's not supported by physical evidence. Ian did not testify in his own defense, but they did call several witnesses saying that there was bad blood between Frank and Ian, making it unlikely that they'd get in a car together, let alone go out and kill somebody together. There was a scientist that was called to testify that the brothers and Frank were excluded from being contributors to any biological evidence from the sheet from the ambulance. The Jimmy Z shirt was soaked with so much of Dana's blood that there was no way to get a reliable profile of DNA or anything else from whatever person had originally worn it. And then on February 16th of 2000, the jury convicted Ian Schweitzer on all 3 counts that he was facing. Again, that's kidnapping, rape, and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison for murder and 2 20-year sentences for the kidnapping and sexual assault charges. A few months later, on April 17th of 2000, his brother Sean pled guilty to manslaughter and kidnapping, and he was sentenced to 1 year in jail. As part of the plea, Sean had to give a statement to the police saying that he was in the back of the Volkswagen when his brother ran over Dana Ireland. The statement continued to say that Sean and Frank are the ones that raped Dana while Ian stood nearby. So we have Sean, who again was 16 at the time that he was arrested. He's seen 2 people convicted of this, and he takes a deal. And part of that deal is he has to write out a confession. We can argue about whether or not that seems coerced and whether he just saw the writing on the wall that, hey, I'm going to be convicted. I got to do something. So I don't know how much weight I put on his confession either.
Yeah, I mean, if you're told, you write this out, you're going to get 1 year in jail. Or if you don't write it out, you see what happened to everybody else involved. Dude, I'm probably writing that letter.
1 year versus forever is a fairly easy decision.
That's not a gamble I'm willing to take. I mean, especially in this court.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Ian did file an appeal, and the Hawaii Supreme Court upheld his conviction in January of 2004. Years would go by, and on April 27th, 2015, Pauline was killed in a prison in New Mexico. That same year, the Hawaii Innocence Project agreed to represent Ian. While the Innocence Project worked on Ian's case, another group known as Judges for Justice took a closer look at Dana's murder and concluded that she must have been attacked and assaulted and killed all by a single attacker. In 2017, additional DNA testing was done on the Jimmy Z t-shirt that was found with the same unknown male DNA that was found at the crime scene and matched the profile of the person who was regularly wearing that t-shirt. This excluded Ian, Sean, and Frank Pauline. On January 16th, 2018, Ian filed a motion for a new trial. The motion pointed out that the new DNA testing was done on the shirt and additional items that had not been tested before the trial. All testing excluded the 3 men.
I will say that absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. Just because their DNA wasn't there doesn't mean they weren't. So I don't know that this is strong enough of an appeal to say they didn't find their DNA before. Why would them continuing not to find it change the direction of the appeal? I think it's a high bar, and that would be tough. In 2019, the Hawaii Innocence Project joined the Innocence Project in New York to start a reinvestigation agreement with the Hawaii County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. They agreed to share information and to help identify the unknown male whose DNA was on all of the crime scene evidence. They hired 2 new experts to evaluate the tire tread evidence near where the bike had been hit and the bite mark on Dana's body. The tire tread expert concluded that Ian's Volkswagen Bug could not have produced the tire tracks at the scene with the bicycle, nor did it match the tracks at the scene where Dana's body was found. But the tracks in those 2 areas did match each other. So
we know that the same vehicle was at both crime scenes, but it was not a Volkswagen Beetle if this expert is correct.
A new dental expert, Dr. Adam Freeman, looked at the injury on Dana's breast and concluded that it wasn't even a bite mark. A long pause there. Like, how do you put that much weight on whether a bite mark belonged to Ian or not, and then come back and say it wasn't even a bite mark?
Well, these are 2 different experts, and that's a pretty big issue.
If I'm bringing 2 experts in to look at a potential bite mark, and one says it belongs to this guy and another says it doesn't, agree to disagree, whatever. If one says it's a bite mark and the other one says it's not, that's a little bit different.
I mean, I've been around children that have bitten each other. It's not very hard just to look at a bite mark and say, oh, that's a bite mark.
Right. Yeah. So that usually we edit out those pauses, but I think it's just my reaction. Additionally, in 2022, Sean met with the Hawaii County prosecutors and recanted his prior confession. Remember, he served his time. He was out of prison, but now he's gone back to say, I lied in my confession to get a lesser sentence. He maintained that he and his brother were innocent. He didn't know about Frank because he wasn't with Frank. Maybe Frank was involved, but Frank was killed in prison. He says that neither he or Ian were there. And with all this evidence that excluded the brothers, the Hawaii Innocence Project filed a motion to vacate Ian's conviction on January 23rd of 2023. The following day, Judge Peter Kubota vacated Ian's conviction and dismissed his charges. Ian left the courthouse and went home to his family that day after more than 20 years in prison. On October 23rd of 2023, the same judge granted Sean's motion to vacate his conviction and dismissed his case. Ian and Sean, who are now 53 and 49 respectively, sued the Hawaii County and members of the Hawaii County Police Department for suppressing evidence, fabricating evidence, and while being dishonest and holding things back and working the Dana Ireland case.
There was an additional part of their lawsuit alleging that the police mishandled the case when they potentially let the real killer get away. And that's where I stand on this whole thing is we're not becoming the next Innocence Project podcast, but it is critical that in all cases we identify without beyond a shadow of a doubt the right people responsible. Otherwise, there's no justice for the victim, and there's an act of misjustice carried out against the wrong person. So it's very, very important that we get all facts correct. Well, it turns out the investigation and new DNA discoveries pointed to a new suspect. We would learn this in February of 2024. So the sole source of all the DNA found at Dana's murder scene belonged to one man who is now a 57-year-old man named Albert LaRue Jr., who lived near the spot where Dana was found dead. Now, using a sample from a discarded fork, a private investigation team was able to make the match definitively. With this new information, police brought him in for questioning in July of 2024. He was not arrested during or after this interrogation, because despite the DNA match, the police chief said there was not enough probable cause for an arrest. He killed himself days after speaking with investigators.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a different different chief than there was when the Schweitzers were arrested and prosecuted. But you're telling me that Frank says they did it, and they did it in a bug, and they can craft all this evidence to convict them, but you have DNA evidence of semen on a woman who's raped and killed, and that's not probable cause?
I really genuinely do not understand that. At a minimum, you can put sexual assault on him.
Right.
So, yeah, I get that you don't have the definitive evidence to say that he was the one alone who killed her. But by golly, you cannot convince me that he was not there and contributed to her sexual assault. So at a minimum, you can arrest him for that.
Right. And I know that a lot of police investigators take their time to say, we want to make sure we have an ironclad case before we go to trial. But they had his DNA, and they had already questioned him. Keeping him in custody would keep him from fleeing. It would keep him from getting rid of witnesses, getting rid of evidence, or killing himself, potentially. I mean, he may have been able to do that behind bars, but it just blows my mind that there was no probable cause for an arrest there when they had full convictions on much less against 3 dudes 20 years ago. So very frustrated by that. And it's rare in a case, John, where we do get this much later, a DNA match. And again, the match is like 1 in 300 million people could be it's him, right? Like it's pretty much definitive. And we know that it was found, the same blood on the shirt was same as the semen, was same on another blood spot. Like he was there. He was there when this happened and participated at a minimum in the rape. So it's rare that we get that kind of definitive answer that long after a case. So I'm thankful we have that. And I really wish that Dana's family would be able to see Albert Laro Jr. be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but we don't get to see that. I imagine they're going to go back and try to put together some other pieces of this to maybe cement the fact that it was Albert Laro Jr., maybe that he did it alone. I don't know, but I'm just very unsatisfied with the result here. We're still waiting on the results of Ian and Sean's lawsuits. Of course, they have potential here to regain some compensation for all the time that was lost in the unlawful prosecution of them for murder for 20 years ago. And Ian was in prison that entire time. Sean wasn't, but still they were both treated wrongfully in this process.
I tried to find if there was a way I could find what vehicle Albert was driving at the time. That information has not been publicly released. I'm sure the police also have the same questions. I would like to say they do. I don't know if they do or not, but that I don't have that information. Also, you mentioned the compensation. Yeah, they're seeking $50,000 a year for every year that they spent incarcerated for their wrongful conviction. So, yeah, that's where this case stands. With him committing suicide right after being questioned, I think that speaks for itself. I think his DNA was there. He committed suicide. I think you can put 2 and 2 together.
Absolutely. So, yeah, horrific case. Dana Ireland's life taken way, way too early. I don't know how much blame to put on investigators here, or whether this is just a situation where they got tunnel vision, where maybe they missed some things, but either way, they did not solve this murder in a timely fashion. Instead, they ruined 2 other lives on top of the lives that had been ruined.
It's interesting. Like, I always say I try to put myself in other people's shoes. If I'm a detective trying to solve this crime, I mean, this is a 23-year-old girl murdered on Christmas Day and sexually assaulted as well. I can't imagine somebody who just does not want to solve that. So if you're told, hey, I was there, I saw this, even though none of the evidence that you have points conclusively to that, how do you as an investigator hear that and then allow yourself to move away from it when the evidence doesn't match up?
I don't know.
That would be tough because you're probably wanting to hold on to any lead imaginable, and even when it doesn't look like it makes sense, to let that go means you have nothing. So in one hand, I get it. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I get it. It has to be tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks all the way around. And I want to apologize myself too. I kept saying this was 20 something years ago. He was convicted. Ian was convicted 20 something years ago. The crime was 35 years ago because it took them so long to even build up enough quote unquote evidence to arrest the Schweitzers. So it looks like, John, I'm pretty confident we know who did it. I think Albert Laro was the guy, at least one of the guys. I hope they're able to button it up and say he was the only guy. And if not, if there are other people involved or responsible, let's bring them to justice.
Absolutely.
But I don't know that there's going to be enough fuel here to go out and find that. It's probably a lot easier for them to say, oh, it was this guy and he's no longer alive. So anyway, we'd love to hear what you guys think. If you think they need to keep digging, if you think we got this wrong, if you think that the police did things the right way, we would love to hear that feedback. You can contact us at truecrimecast@gmail.com. We're also at truecrimecast on all social media platforms.
Guys, we appreciate you very much. Please don't forget to go over to patreon.com/truecrimecast. Go ahead and sign up for a monthly membership if you can. It's a great way to get your content early, ad-free, and you get a bonus Patreon exclusive episode each and every month.
Would love to see some more of those 5-star reviews. We will read them live each episode as they come in.
Until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.